So let's dive into the presentation then, which brings together, I guess, thinking over 11 months with all of the various project partners across DecarboN8. It's a collaboration across the 8 most research-intensive universities in the north of England. So this has built up as a result of the discussions we've been having with our local partners and national partners over that time period. So it's thanks to everyone, but myself and Richard will take the blame for anything that goes wrong in the presentation. So carbon reduction. There's a need to transition from 30 years of almost no progress in decarbonising transport in absolute terms to zero emissions by 2050. There remains dispute about what exactly this means. So the Tyndall Centre advocates a more aggressive emission reduction pathway than the Committee on Climate Change, for example. This workshop isn't going to address that issue head on. For us, I think the key point is that we need to reduce emissions now, every year, year on year, somewhere between 6% to 14%, depending on your set of assumptions. And that has to happen in totality across the whole of the country. So this is a transition over the next decade and the 2 that follow on a scale that we've not seen before across all sectors of the economy. Now, a clear national framework is going to be essential to steer this. Without it, the opportunities for authorities to avoid difficult conversations and difficult actions are many and varied. This is what happened in 2008 when we had an 80% target. Lots of things were in the 20% too difficult bin. Now, the Transport Decarbonisation Plan should provide that framework, and we start this afternoon both with the hope and the expectation that it will, and with a view to connecting that national framework to the aspirations for a place-based approach as part of that. So we submitted the bid for DecarboN8 in the summer of 2018, although we didn't launch until September last year. And our goal is to promote place-based decarbonisation. So what do we think it is? Well, we think it's a recognition that while decarbonisation has to happen everywhere, it's enacted in places. So we're going to try and set out some of what we think are the important dimensions of place-based decarbonisation, and we've got 8 key elements. And then we'll open that out for discussion with you before hearing from the 4 speakers about what it might mean to them. The outputs of the discussion today will help shape a presentation I'm going to give for the Department for Transport as part of their TDP consultation process in late July and early August, as well as helping us to refine our agenda for change. So the first key element of a place-based approach is to think about the diversity of places and why they have the travel demands that they do. So for example, here we've got the service sector labour market of the middle of Leeds, the highly tourist dependent front at sunny Scarborough, and the vast distribution sheds off the M62 in Wakefield. From ports to national parks, from university cities to former mining towns, the demand for travel can be really diverse, as can the balance between people, freight, residents, and visitors. The second key element is recognising different transport systems. So decarbonisation's been a big or growing issue for 30 years, at least for many of us, but our transport networks and patterns of moving around have developed over much longer time periods. So in cities, there's typically a good radial public transport system, but major gaps in the periphery and for lateral movements. Some places have invested in and embedded a cycling culture with good cycling infrastructure. Others, for reasons of geography, climate, or political antipathy, have not. So over a quarter of the population of South Cambridgeshire, for example, cycle once a week, but less than 5% of the population of Wellingborough does. The options for travel and the mode shift that we could achieve look very different between places, although this is something that can be changed. When we talk about place, we also don't just mean local authority, although a lot of the data does draw us to those kinds of assessments. But we need to understand the character of what people and communities take to be places. The pictures on the left show different cuts of urban Leeds. Some parts of Leeds have 30% terraced housing in an output area, others as little as 10%. The data suggests that only 51% of terraced houses have on-street parking, and in half of those, it's inadequate levels of on-street parking. The images on the right show current very clumsy approach to introducing electrification in such areas. Some areas will be better suited as places for some kinds of solution. Electrification everywhere would be possible, but would it be desirable or good value compared with, say, reducing car ownership? Would it be as inclusive? Another site-to-built form is agency. In Leeds, up to 45% of accommodation is in the private rented sector. So there are limited rights for tenants to amend buildings. So schemes which households can apply for don't land evenly across the population and across places. Fourth element's different populations and cultures, and we'll hear a bit more about this later. So whilst most of our statistics get broken down by age and gender and sometimes ethnicity, not enough of this is understood in a place context. So if we take West Yorkshire, for example, here's a happy family out on the Leeds-Bradford cycle superhighway. But we know that non-white communities are only half as likely to cycle as white communities. What difference does an ethnic mix of 25% Asian British, which we see in Bradford, to activities, modes, cultures of travel, compared with Wakefield, for example, where that percentage is just 2? Similarly, who are e-scooters for and smart autonomous fleets? The needs of travellers at the younger and older end of the spectrum are really different. Urban centres are 40% under 25 and 14% 65 plus. It's quite different in other places where over a quarter of the population is over 65, and that's rising. The fifth point is different visions, more and less car and carbon dependent. So there's a very different set of priorities which exist in different places. In the past 12 months, York's pledged to make the city centre traffic free, and it has a history of pursuing restraint measures, partly from the necessity of having a historic urban core. However, across the region, and not very far away, including in the outer ring road of York, we see road expansion projects being welcomed. We even saw a Stop the Trolleybus campaign being successful in Leeds. So whilst there is a climate emergency and demands from some of the public for action everywhere, there's also a very different set of political realities on the ground. So all of this results in very different carbon starting points in different places. And at this point, I'll hand over to Richard Walker, who's been exploring some of these differences.
Right, hi everybody. Yes, so Greg, if you can do my slides. Yeah, so I mean, basically I was looking for a data set or a metric that could be used to sort of see how different local authorities are doing on transport emissions, and ITS has got hold of a really fabulous data set which is taken from the annual MOT test. Now this isn't currently a published data set in terms of it being a national statistic, but it contains everything you need to know to make a really good calculation of what emissions per head is from vehicles. So it's every year when you take your test, you know where the people of the vehicle lives, what the engine characteristics is, and what the annual mileage has been since the last time you took the test. And that allows you to give you a really good calculation of emissions per head of resident population for any area you might wish to come up with. So I felt that this was quite a good metric that local authorities can feel ownership of or responsibility for in terms of measuring how they're going on transport decarbonisation. So let's go to the next slide, please, Greg. So yeah, so the histogram there shows that there is quite wide variation between districts. It varies by a factor of 5. So the lowest in the country is London Borough of Hackney, and the highest in the country is South Northamptonshire, which is the area also known as Motorsport Valley. And I don't think MOT data includes Formula One cars, but it includes Formula One people, I suppose, and the cars that they like to drive. So anyway, so I think the key message of this slide is there's huge variation, and then there's a big sort of mass of places that you might call Middle England, where that are grouped around the median or the mean of the mean nationwide is about 630 kilos a year. So and the lowest emission districts, and this is, remember, this is car emissions from cars, doesn't include use of buses and taxis. 17 of the lowest 20 per head are inner London boroughs, plus also Manchester, Liverpool, and Nottingham. And the highest are almost all affluent rural districts in what I've called the extended Greater South East, which includes places like Cotswolds, East Hampshire, West Essex. So yeah, next slide, please, Greg. So so this slide just graphs all the 326 districts. So the left-hand graph, if you can't see this, you could perhaps study it later. But the key message of this graph is that emissions are causally, or I think there's a strong correlation anyway between emissions per head and population density on the left-hand graph, and on index of multiple deprivation, which is a measure of how sort of rich, poor, affluent, deprived area is. And these two are not, they are correlated to each other. So the top right-hand graph shows population density against deprivation score. And England's quite unusual by world standards in that rural areas tend to be more affluent than urban areas, which is unusual worldwide. But there is a big variation in deprivation. So there are some densely populated areas that are well off, some thinly populated places that are deprived. But the thing that the bottom right-hand graph shows the strongest correlation that emissions per head has is with car ownership. The bottom right-hand graph shows a very clear, strong, positive correlation. The higher car ownership is, the more emissions per head you've got. And that shows that, you know, that even areas where you've got very high car ownership, so lots of second and third family cars, household cars, they're still driving big mileages in those second and third cars. And not all affluent areas have high car ownership and use, and that is a London thing, but it's also not only a London thing. So next slide, please, Greg. So so what the next task in my sort of analysis was to try and classify districts by type, and to look for a classification that was a blend of both population density characteristics, or built environment characteristics, as Greg showed them, and also socioeconomic and demographic characteristics. And fortunately, professionals have already done that. So the ONS come up with what they call the area classification, which is based on all the different things measured in the 2011 census. And although the area classification is mainly designed for small areas like census output areas and super output areas below the district level, they also, ONS has also categorized entire districts. So it's obviously a massive generalization when you're talking about the district level, but if it's good enough for ONS, it's good enough for us. And the map on the right-hand side shows you what falls out of the data in terms of you know, how to classify places. And they are slightly different from what you might have guessed in advance, but they kind of make sense the more you think about it. So that's a good sign. And the first, I mean, there's lots of things you can pick up on this map, which I won't go into great detail, but one key thing is that genuinely rural, or places with genuinely dominant rural characteristics, don't really exist in Middle England. You've got a category that's called town and country living, which is the blue, in the kind of the sort of centre of Middle England, and then you've got this category called affluent England, which is quite a close fit with what I call the home counties. And these are places that I call exurbia. So they look like the countryside in terms of the fields, but they're actually people are living quite an urban lifestyle in terms of the jobs they do and the distances they drive. And the other big message from this map is London is different, and it comes in two different flavours. Inner London and outer London are different. Okay, there's more I could say about that, but I haven't got time. So could you go on to the next slide, Greg?
Yeah, 2 minutes, Richard.
Yeah, okay. So there's now a lot of league tables in the next slides, which I won't go to in great detail, but they're there for you to look at. But so this first slide shows you emissions and other kind of transport characteristics according to those 8 place type categories. They're grouped in the order of average car emissions per head, and you can see that that there is the places, urban areas have a lower share of emissions than they do of population, and the town and country areas have a higher share of car emissions than they do of population. And they're mapped very closely to level of car ownership, but not that closely to take up of walking and cycling. Next, please. So this table is trying to show this table is showing that there is quite a wide variation, around a factor of 2, within the ONS area classifications. And it's partly because the districts in the same category really are different. I mean, the Isle of Wight is not the same as the Cotswolds, and Manchester is not the same as Warwick. But what we're looking for is ways in to examine places with similar characteristics that have different emissions outcomes. And I might call that the space in which you can see the fruits of past policy, and the space in which has some scope for future action on policy, to look at places that have done well on emissions and say what can places do that they're like similar places to do as well as they do. And that's kind of what I'm really after. So if you go to the next slide, Greg. This is one way, it's a slightly crude way that I've analysed places that so this slide shows relatively low emissions compared to their population density and affluence. So on the left-hand table shows places with low emissions compared, that have got low emissions for the fact that they have low for their level of population density, and it throws out quite an interesting set of places. But I would describe them as northern rural areas that have got low population density, mainly because they contain like large areas of moorland where there's nobody living at all. But the population that is there might be living more in urban communities such as Carlisle or Scarborough district, contain quite large sort of areas of moorland. I'm not sure how useful that is, but there's something, you're learning something anyway. The areas that are low compared to their affluence, say Richmond upon Thames, Kingston upon Thames, very affluent areas with low IMD scores, but quite low emissions per head. So you say, well, what is it about these places that we want to, they're obviously doing well economically, but they've got relatively low emissions. What are they doing right? And the right-hand table shows you the list of places, just excluding London boroughs, which might be considered a special case. And you see places like Cambridge, York, Oxford, places that have run a policy that's about sustainable transport for a period of 30 years or more. I think there is a lesson to be learned there. Last slide, Greg, please.
Can we skip through that one, Richard? We're a bit behind.
Yeah, I won't go into great length, but I just wanted to show you very quickly. So these are places that are doing badly. So places that have got high emissions compared to the population density and affluence, and places that have got high emissions. And the worst in the country is Surrey Heath, which is Michael Gove's constituency, which is places like Camberley, and that's places that are quite densely populated, but people doing a lot of driving. And the places that are high emissions compared to their level of deprivation are obviously a breed if you look at them, but there are places like East Lindsey, which is like Skegness, East Lincolnshire, Fenland, Tendring, which is sort of East Clacton and Harwich and places like Essex, and there are kind of places where they're not very well off, but they're having to do more driving to access, to live their lives. And so, there are some lessons I think in this analysis which could be of use. But that it's an ongoing process, and I'll hand back over to Greg and be interested in people's comments.
Thanks, Richard. Richard's going to be manning the Q&A function as well now, so do get questions in on any aspects of this. So I'm just going to, I've got 3 or 4 slides, I think, to kind of finish up. So hopefully we've established the importance of thinking about places and why we start where we do. There's a lot that sits behind a national emissions curve, but I want to briefly look ahead. So the pathway, the national pathway, is the sum of every individual authority's pathway across the country. What that means in reality is that one area's inaction or inertia, for whatever reason, like the blue line, means that there's an anticipation implicit, although outside of their consideration, that somewhere else or lots of other places are going to be able to go even faster. And I would argue that the average pathway, whether it's 6% or more, is so difficult that expecting other places to go faster is a really big ask indeed. So thinking about different pathways is actually something we need to factor in right from the start. We did some work with the local government association where we ran workshops looking at what they thought their strategies might contain, and you get some areas where half of the emissions reduction are put over to vehicle technology improvements, and other areas where half of the improvements are expected to come from mode shift. But at what cost and how quickly could either of those be delivered still needs to be understood. We've recently run some workshops on what's the potential for shared mobility inside and outside urban areas. There's no scale on that chart deliberately, but just to show that the potential for some of these schemes to work in urban areas much more than outside of urban areas. Like many of the mode shift options seem to favour the urban areas. So what do we do about these high emitting areas that Richard was talking about? We need to get a grip on these different pathways. And we also need to recognise that policies to cut carbon are likely to come at quite a different price in different places. So with all the diversity we've just discussed, how could they be the same? And this really matters when it comes to looking at questions of value for money. So if place B, for example, here it's £220 per tonne of carbon cut versus £150 in place A, well then B would look like it's bad value for money. So maybe it wouldn't get the funding, wouldn't take action. But that doesn't give us a workable answer, because as I showed earlier, everywhere has to shift. And if B's not doing it, A would actually have to do more, perhaps to spend more, to spend differently. So thinking about what we really mean when we're talking about valuing carbon and how to reward good value for money investments, I think is really challenging, because some of the costs might be well out of line with what might be good value for money overall as an average, but actually are really important given the costs of doing it in different places. So there's a real fairness question to be thought through there. And we do know that we spend radically different amounts of money on transport per head of population, the chart on the right, but also in things like subsidy in rail passenger franchises, where Northern has historically received the largest subsidy, although everywhere's struggling at the moment. So we need to really think about our kind of alignment of funding with places so that it matches the decarbonisation agenda, and different costs of action in different places is critical. So the final slide then, before we throw it open to questions, our key element 8, is that decarbonisation needs to happen everywhere, and it needs to happen with, through and for everyone. So nowhere gets a free pass. It's a massive challenge. It's massive. But it's also an opportunity to try and deliver something transformative for places and for people. So that's our opening presentation. We'll throw it over